Good morning, everyone. Welcome back from the break. It's already been a pretty scintillating morning, I think. The earlier discussion sketched out how important 2019 is going to be in the fintech story. We're in now a period of open banking, of PSD2. Data flows are starting to expand between consumers and banks. That's raised a lot of concern around cybersecurity. At the same time, we have the advent of cashless societies. We have banks doing more deals with fintech startups and beginning to share technology, to share customers. This brave new world raises all sorts of very important questions, especially for regulators. And that's why I'm so pleased to be moderating a discussion this morning with Francois Villeroy, the governor of the Banque de France, and with Olivier Guersent, who is the top financial services regulator with the European Commission. And they're going to share with us their views on what comes next with regulation and with fintech. And Governor, I'd like to begin with you, if I may. 2019, how is the role of the regulator, especially on the banking side, how is that going to be changing this year as you look at the challenges before you?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Bonjour à tous. Could I start with a paradox that everybody here probably is aware that it's not obvious to combine regulation with stability and innovation. But this is the way we proceed, and I guess with some success. So I want to focus on some key elements of our policy towards innovation. First, we develop an extremely active dialogue with all of you and with fintechs. We created 3 years ago with the IMF an ACPR. ACPR is the French supervisor for banks and assurance. I'm chairman of ACPR. We created a fintech forum, and we engaged in a very active dialogue. We met more than 400 fintechs since the creation of this forum. Second, and this is very important for me, we must innovate ourselves. And this is probably not conventional wisdom about central bankers. They are seen as very serious, and indeed we are very serious. But we have to be very active in developing our own innovation. If I can quote some examples for the Banque de France, we created a lab 2 years ago, and we appointed a chief digital officer, Thierry Bedouin, who happens to be here. And we will have the pleasure to welcome, to give you an example, Christine Lagarde in this lab before lunch. We were among the first central banks to develop a blockchain on SEPA, which we call Madre, on SEPA identifiers, and it's a success. And we are now very active on data. I mentioned our chief digital officer, so a first CDO, and we found this acronym so seductive for central banks that we decided to appoint a second CDO, a chief data officer, Renaud Lacroix. I appointed him 1 month ago. Because data, for you, as for us, are the real treasure. But can I focus, perhaps, Edouard, on a more the last aspect, which I introduced last year here, if I remember correctly, which is artificial intelligence. I announced last year that we would create a task force with the industry to look at artificial intelligence, all its promises and all its questions. And we delivered. We published last December, following the work of this task force, a discussion paper. I invite you to read through it. Where we gave some principles, and now perhaps I would like to say how we will implement these principles. To make a long story short, the key challenge about artificial intelligence is to avoid the black box effect. It's a very promising technique. We all agree about that. We will all develop algorithms, and they will help us. But we must understand them. So it's the question of fairness and adaptability of algorithms, what is in the algorithm. We must master them, and it's a question of governance. And third, we must be able to explain them. It can seem obvious, but it will be probably in our democracies an increasing challenge. So, following this discussion paper, we would like this year, and here I want to announce our projects, to develop 3 very concrete fields where we will test these principles. Our first priority, and we will develop these fields, these projects, with the industry and with many of you. The first one is anti-money laundering, and we think that algorithms can be very useful in this field. The second one is validating internal models, and we know it's a very demanding task. We think that algorithms and artificial intelligence can help us. And the third one, if we can, is about customer relation and marketing practices. Can we be sure that algorithms are not used in an unfair way? Or, to put it in a more positive way, how can we use artificial intelligence to check that conduct rules are adequately implemented? So I will stop here, but to engage, to innovate ourselves, to engage in a permanent and open dialogue with you, and to co-develop together some projects like the examples I gave on artificial intelligence.
Olivier, before I turn to you, I just wanted to follow up with a quick question on the AI piece. You're concerned, Governor, about the black box effect, and that's why you want to set up these 3 initiatives to protect consumers from any negative effects in artificial intelligence. Does that mean that the bank, as part of its regulatory remit, would review how startups develop AI functions and then decide whether those can be approved for going into the marketplace?
Is it for Olivier or is it for me?
It
It will be for Olivier too.
It could be, yeah.
Yes, we will certainly review. But the first step is to understand and develop together. I mentioned some of the risks, but without any doubt, it's like blockchain. The technique is very useful. And we must not only be open to technical innovation, we must use them. So it would be completely stupid to look only at the dangers. So it's why we want to enter these 3 projects I mentioned. If I give the example of anti-money laundering, yes, we have to avoid the black box effect, but the positive aspects and the positive perspective of such a development is very promising for us and for financial players.
Olivier, is artificial intelligence something that your office is reviewing?
Yeah, well, not only, but yes, indeed. I mean, I think the point is, my perspective is necessarily different than the perspective of François. First, because I'm a regulator, and second, because I need to make sure that the situation across the board in Europe is as consistent as possible. So we have a number of challenges. This technology is disruptive, and we are only at the beginning of the disruption. That's one challenge, and we have to cater for this, and that's a joint effort from supervisors and regulators alike, individually but also jointly, together with the European Commission or within the European supervisory agencies. The second issue really is that our regulatory framework has been conceived and adopted at a time where we were just at the beginning of this disruption. So, I mean, in many ways, they are not fully adapted to the new world of tech, and by this I mean fintech in general, artificial intelligence and machine learning, blockchain. So we will have, starting now, actually for the next 2 years, the review of all the main pieces of regulation, MiFID, MiFIR, EMIR, etc. And one of the big challenges will be to make sure it's fit for purpose in the new digital age. So that is going to be to keep us busy. And François is right. I mean, it's by definition difficult to reconcile innovation, competition, cost effectiveness, and also the number of so the opportunities and the threats that go together with it. So
you have to find that balance between innovation and protecting the consumer.
Yes, well, not only protecting the consumer. For the time being, it's a question of consumer protection and market integrity. If it becomes bigger, as I think it will, that may even become an issue of financial stability. So we all need to be alert to this, and it's a constant calibration to allow innovation to thrive, because if it doesn't thrive here, it will thrive in other parts of the world, while at the same time ensuring that, that we keep our markets' integrity safe.
I see.
No, can I only add a wording consideration following what Olivier just said? I'm quite impressed by new words which are flourishing, including since our last year meeting. We spoke since 3 years about fintechs. We speak now about big techs, will probably come. But you are all aware that now we introduce RegTech, which is precisely what you describe, Olivier, how to introduce technology in regulation. And the last baby, so to say, is SupTech, how we will use technology also for supervisors. And it's why I mentioned artificial intelligence, for instance, to validate internal models. But, and this is probably the best sign that everybody is progressing at the same pace.
So that means SupTech, I think you're hearing that first here, that phrase.
It just created it.
That means that central banks like the Banque de France, and as well as regulators, will be looking for help from startups in developing potential AI that could perform supervisory functions. So this will be a new breed of entrepreneurs who are coming forth with potential companies, and that'll be part of your review.
But we will keep control.
You will keep control. I see. I'd like to switch to open banking and PSD2. I know that that's a topic that's very important for many of the participants at the conference right now. We are through year one of the implementation, but the all-important standards are still being developed for introduction in September. Olivier, perhaps you could just bring us up to speed with what you see in terms of state of play on PSD2 rollout right now.
Okay. So PSD2 is not effective for a year. I mean, the anniversary was last week.
Yeah.
And you can already see the impact of the change. I mean, we have had, in all various jurisdictions in Europe, above 200 applications for licenses under PSD2. So that's quite big for a year. Of course, now the next frontier, in a way, is well, maybe a word of clarification first. I mean, it's not only fintech in the sense of startups. I mean, what we've seen is very much the incumbents joining the club big time over that years, and that is corroborated by a number of recent industry surveys. Lately, the Deloitte survey or the Finextra survey in 2018. So that's interesting, because you have a real competition not only among startups but also among startups and the banks, and this is very much what we wanted to engineer.
Right.
And this is also why the next step is so important, which is the regulatory technical standard that will come in September on the API, and so how do you connect?
Can you share with us if some of the incumbents, some of the banks are not working as fast to open their APIs and satisfy the RTS standards that are coming? Are some banks dragging their feet?
It's a bit early to say that. I mean, we're 9 months from this being effective. It will be effective on 14th of September, 2019. But I think what is interesting, banks have been trying to delay, have been trying to make it different. Well, they didn't succeed. So now they're catching up. I mean, I'm pleased to see that they are grouping and developing standard APIs, which I think is very reassuring. So I have no reasons to be really worried at the moment. I mean, last year we were more worried than we are now.
Yeah.
Yes.
And on the startup side, are you concerned that with open banking now there will be a number of players who are perhaps not as sophisticated as some of the ones that have been in for a long time, and that some of those startups that are, qualifying to get data from account data from banks and so forth, I don't know, may cause problems down the road for consumers, may cause problems for institutions?
No, well, I think that's clearly the challenge for supervisors, for financial supervisors, but also for data supervisors. But I also think, there is a thin line between this being an excuse for banks to delay the uptake by new players. Right. So this is always what you would say. I mean, and this is what the banks have been telling us for long. Is you forced us to invest lots of money in the security of the systems, and now you are opening big holes into it. This is insane, etc. Well, no, I mean, we're convinced, and actually, again, the collective work that is being undertaken by the banks on the standard API shows that there are ways to have standardized, securized access that allow competition and protect the integrity of the transactions.
So the balance can be struck?
Yes, of course it can.
Yeah.
It's not easy. Right. It will require the supervisors to be vigilant. I would say it will require the supervisors also to be coordinated, because I don't think we can afford to have different standards in different member states. I mean, remember that this company is once licensed CAN passport. So I would be worried that we have different standards for granting the licenses in different member states. That's a general issue that we have across the board. That's one of the reasons why the Commission proposed to strengthen these very powers to ensure convergence for the three ESAs. And I think it's absolutely key. If you want to have a competitive level playing field and ensure safety and integrity for the system, you need to have convergence in the standards and the way they're implemented.
Perhaps some words about the way we implement PSD2 in France. At this stage, we have given already 7 authorizations to new players, be they AI, SP or PISP. It's about account information service or payment initiating services. We are all focused on September 14, which is a key milestone. And I am at this stage rather confident about the fact that we will do it, because we developed a common and PSD2 compliant API, which was a key requirement. And as you probably know, it's provided by STAT, and which associates banks and new players. As Olivier said, security remains a key issue. And I know there is sometimes a tendency to oppose innovation and new players and incumbents and security. We must absolutely go beyond this apparent opposition, because if we don't deliver on the security side, if we are vulnerable through too weak players, as you mentioned, or inconsistent API, if we are vulnerable to cyber attacks, innovation will lose at the end of the day. And customer confidence is an absolute prerequisite in order to develop these new services. So I know that in the short run it can be seen as a contradiction. I have absolutely no doubt that the joint work which has been delivered is the best way to deliver in the long run.
Every year we go to fintech conferences and we hear the theme of big tech is coming. Amazon, Facebook, Google. We see now that there is a lot of action on that front, payments being made across messaging apps. We see what's happening in India, and that's quite an inspiration. From where you sit, Governor, perhaps begin with you. What challenges does the advent of big tech in the banking sector pose for you?
I agree with you, Edward, that this is probably the key development in the years to come. Let me only quote one figure about online banking in France at present, because we published some months ago a very interesting ACPR survey. I don't know if you are aware about the figures. Neobanks and online banks are at this stage have 6% of the French customers. It can seem rather modest, But a more impressive figure is that 1/3 of customer onboarding, so new clients, come to new banks. And this goes already a magnitude of the phenomenon. They have a very strong image, a very good customer acceptance, still a weak profitability, which is a challenge. And this brings me to big techs. Probably, and we see it in China already, we see it a bit less in the US, they will be the great disruption in the years to come. And if I can take a bet, probably in two fields. First is flow services, and the first one is payment, I guess. And second is some IT techniques like cloud computing or scoring. I don't want to elaborate more, but we see a great potential of disruption through these two levels. And if I may add the challenge for us as regulators, but perhaps for all of us as a community and for our market economies, I'm impressed by the fact that the challenge raised by big techs in these two fields are not focused on classical financial regulation. They go beyond classical financial regulation. If I can elaborate on three directions. First is data protection, because obviously the real value in payment services, it's not the fees, it's the data. And if big techs enter payment services, it's not to get new fees, it's to get new data. And data protection, it's not our issue or our issue only as financial regulations, and it's not the field where international cooperation is the most developed, to use a euphemism. Second, cybersecurity, obviously, and third, competition and antitrust. These three challenges raised by big techs go beyond financial regulation, and I must confess that in these three fields, we really need to develop international cooperation. We did it in financial regulation under the umbrella of FSB, Basel III, and in Europe under the umbrella of the Commission. But on these three new fields, data protection, cybersecurity, and competition, antitrust, really the challenge is ahead of us.
So what would be the appropriate forum for negotiating this international cooperation? Would it be the FSB, the Financial Stability Board, or because these are non-financial issues? I mean, technically, it's data protection. And what do you think, Olivier?
Well, I think it's fortunate that GDPR entered into force. It was just about time.
Will that cover it?
This. Well, of course. I mean, I fully agree with what, when we may know that I've spent 20 years of my life doing competition policy. So competition, I think, is a big issue here. Data protection is the second one. And of course, in a way, the financial regulation or supervision issues that pose big tech, strictly speaking, are not different from any other. I mean, they will be subjected to PSD2 if they offer PSD2 services, and they will be dealt with in that regard the same way as anybody else. What is really where really is the issue is in the cross-cutting issues, data protection, competition, and financial supervision, where I fully agree with what François said. I mean, what characterizes these tech giants is that they're able to roll over their service throughout Europe, actually throughout the world, very quickly. They've shown in many other fields that they're able to capture the value added, actually all of the value added, very, very quickly. And they're able to exclude other market participants pretty efficiently from the market. So that, I think, is the first set of issues that my colleagues that are dealing with antitrust will have to deal with. And that's not something we can coordinate within the FSB, but there are other fora. Right. There is a very effective US-EU forum in particular in antitrust. There's also international organizations. And data is probably the other threat. I mean, we have GDPR in Europe. It's interesting to see that everybody told us, well, you're crazy, GDPR is far too constraining. Right. It will I mean, basically, Europe will be cut off the rest of the world. What happens is exactly the opposite. The rest of the world move on to GDPR.
Well, you saw what Tim Cook said at Apple, where he said
Yes.
GDPR should take place in the US. Yeah.
Well, because it's the new golden standard. I mean, if you want to secure your consumers and assure them that the data are appropriately dealt with, you need to move to that type of standards. And I think the smartest of the big tech have understood that. But that is going to be an issue because François is absolutely right. They do not enter that market for the sake of entering that market. They enter that market because if on top of all the rest, they have the financial data of their customers, they're really sat on a golden mine. Yes.
Yeah, very good. Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there.
Can I add one sentence
Okay.
to say that on competition and data protection, Europe, thanks to the Commission, has a very active forum and regulation. I see with some worry the US still lagging behind on these two fields, even if they look at RGPD with interest. And cybersecurity is the issue where international security is the least developed. For obvious reasons, there is an issue of confidence around the table.
Right.
But can I stress, and this is my last word, that, as you know, France is chairing the G7 this year, and cybersecurity is one of the priorities of the French presidency. So we'll try to make progress.
Very interesting. Well, as you can see, there are many challenges to confront in 2019, and please join me in thanking my guests, Francois Villeroy and Olivier Guersent, for sharing their views with us. Thank you.